Okay, so welcome to the community call. I'm glad to see a lot of people. There will be Shard Labs talking, and then we'll have a number of questions we'll answer. So you'll be able to ask your questions to Shard Labs, of course, and then we'll be here to ask more general questions about StarkNet. So feel free to ask your questions in the dedicated channel. And without further ado, if you can present, that would be wonderful.
Joining the community call.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here as part of Shard Labs. And of course, thanks to StarkNet team for the invitation. My name is Tiago, and I'm here today together with Fabian to talk about one of the developments that we are doing for StarkNet on the tooling side. But first, let me just start by giving a quick introduction to Shard Labs. So we're a blockchain specialized company. Our core skills are around protocol development, such as bridges between chains, client forks, and upgrades. But we also work with some dApp development and overall running blockchain infrastructure. And so why are we here today? We're here to talk about our DevNet and Hardhat plugin. Our main goal with these is to provide tooling which allows developers to use a more familiar implementation for developing and deploying smart contracts on StarkNet. And with this, basically enabling you to quickly fire up your personal blockchain, which you can use to run tests, execute commands, inspect the states while controlling how the chain operates. So, all right, so let's jump to a quick walkthrough where Fabian will present. Fabian, take it away.
Hi, thank you, Tiago. My name is Fabian. I will now share my screen where I'll start. So I'm currently on the first slide showing you the title and the subtitle. Let's move on to the second slide, which informs you about the assumptions this presentation makes. So first of all, it is assumed that you have used StarkNet command line interface and that you know how to create a Hardhat project with TypeScript support. Now to install the plugin, it's just regular npm installation, and to finish the installation, you'll need to include this import statement into your Hardhat config file. Now, I know it's a rather long name, but I like to think of it as the longer the name, the better the plugin. So, after installing the plugin, two new Hardhat tasks appear. You can check them out with npx Hardhat, or if you have Hardhat global installed, which is what this tutorial will assume, you can just use the abbreviation HH. So these two tasks introduced by the plugin are StarkNet compile and StarkNet deploy, which obviously compile and deploy StarkNet contracts. So the first of these two tasks is StarkNet compile. Its main benefit is that, okay, now I'm on the slide showing you the StarkNet compile task. First it shows that the main benefit of this task is that instead of what you would do with StarkNet command line tool, can be achieved by simply typing the command in the lower part of the slide. And in fact, instead of specifying the file path, the file name, you can just target all the contracts by not providing any path. And the artifact generation scheme is the ordinary Hardhat procedure. Like the sources structure is mirrored into your artifacts directory. So now I'm heading to the next slide, talking about StarkNet deploy task. So this second task introduced by the plugin, well, its main benefit is that instead of typing this long command in StarkNet CLI, you will type this long command in the plugin. Now, it turns out it's not much of an improvement considering just the length, but notice how the path that we specify in the plugin section, it can in fact be either a file or a directory, or it can be multiple paths. And if for any reason you want to deploy all of your contracts, you can just type HH StarkNet deploy, and of course provide to which network you are deploying, and all your JSON files corresponding to Cairo sources will be deployed. Now I'm heading to the next slide with the title Interacting with StarkNet DevNet. So you may have noticed that it takes some time for transactions to be confirmed on the alpha testnet. So to speed up your testing, you may want to use StarkNet DevNet tool, also a tool developed by us, ShardLabs, which is a local version of testnet. And it
Fabian,
provides...
if I can interrupt just a sec, can you specify again on which slide you are, please?
It's the slide number 8.
Slide 8.
Wonderful, thank you.
Actually, I was just going from the slide 7 to slide 8, yeah. Okay, now on slide 8, yeah, like the StarkNet DevNet is it's an ordinary pip package which can be installed with pip install, which adds this new command StarkNet DevNet. So if you run it, you get a local instance of the DevNet with the default settings of listening on localhost with the port 5000, and to be able to interact with the DevNet through the plugin, you just need to update your Hardhat config file with this little code snippet in the bottom of the screen. So now I'm heading to slide number 9, which shows you how I mean with exactly which commands you can interact with the DevNet. So with you can interact with it both through the StarkNet command line interface and through Hardhat with the plugin. So you would need to specify either the gateway URL, or since now you've updated your Hardhat config file in the previous slide, you can use the network with the name DevNet. Now heading to slide number 10, we're going to discuss, or I'm going to show you how this plugin affects the Hardhat testing ability. So this plugin doesn't really introduce the test task itself. It's already natively present with Hardhat, but what it does is that it allows you to interact with your StarkNet contracts in Hardhat scripts and in Mocha tests. So let's inspect the Mocha testing case. But of course, to be able to use it, the DevNet in the Mocha tests, you also need to update your Hardhat config with the Mocha entry, stating that you want the DevNet to be used as the StarkNet network. And now I headed to the to the next slide. I think it's number 11 with the title Deployment and Reusing of Contracts. So installing the plugin made this StarkNet object importable from Hardhat. And you can use its contract factory paradigm to either deploy new instances or reuse the old instances. You will just need to specify the name of your contract, which is the name of file without the Cairo extension. Now heading to slide 12 about handling storage variables with this framework. So let's see how storage variables are handled. Assume these parts of a contract. So it's basically a balanced storage variable, like in the official tutorial that explains StarkNet interaction. And we have the increase function and the get function for the balance variable. On the next slide, we can see how one would interact with this contract first using the command line interface, which requires providing the ABI, the gateway URL, and you provide the inputs in a non-structured manner, like you just sequentially type them. Okay, so in this case, it's just one input, the number 10. And in Hardhat, if you have the plugin enabled, first of all, notice how function and argument names are the same as in the source file that we defined in the previous slide. And also notice how the result, the res variable, is mapped to balance, which is something you will probably want to do if you are using the plugin. Also, since version 0.3.0, the plugin relies on big int type because Cairo's felt type, which is the default type, can be too big for JavaScript's ordinary number type, and this can cause some precision issues. So all function outputs of that are the result of either invoking or calling will have their output in the big int form. Also, notice how this code snippet, this example, is using the syntactic sugar of just appending the n after the number, which is available since ECMAScript version 2020. So on the next slide, it is explained how signed transactions are handled. So in case your function requires, I don't know, the public key, or it checks the transaction signature, you would use it like this. You would specify the signature as an array, preferably of either strings or big ints, and you would pass it in as an extra argument after the actual function arguments. The next slide explains how arrays are handled. So assume a contract with this function called SumArray, which, as its name suggests, it sums the elements of an array. This is how it would be handled in StarkNet command line tool. So you would first specify in the inputs its length, and then its elements. And if you're using the Hardhat plugin, then you can just provide the array itself. The implementation takes care of the length. So you just need to provide the elements. And once again, the result is in the type of big int. Next slide deals with tuples and structs. So assume that you have a contract with struct called point with felt members x and y, and you have a function which sums a tuple of 2 points, and it returns the result as tuple of 2 felts. On the next slide, we can see the difference in the usage of this function in StarkNet command line tool and in Hardhat with the plugin enabled. So once again, we can see that providing the numbers themselves is more well structured and Hardhat case. So you specify the members of the struct by their name, x and y, and also since JavaScript does not enable tuple support, so there is no native tuple support. For this purpose, JavaScript arrays are utilized, and this have been the main use cases with which this plugin and DevNet can be helpful. So it's time for you to ask questions or require additional clarification if I skipped anything or did not explain something properly. Thank you for your attention.
Wonderful. Thank you, Fabian. So I see there are a lot of questions. I was following the presentation, so I didn't see the questions. So I'm gonna go through them. If you have questions, please write them in the channel. Fabian, if you see questions and want to address them directly, go. Otherwise, go ahead and do so. Otherwise, I will ask the questions while I go through them.
Okay, I already see one question from Elemeno. I can answer it. So he asks, does the DevNet connect to L1 girly or something? That's a very good question. So just last week, an issue on our GitHub repository was raised concerning this same thing. So this is a feature that we are planning on adding, but currently no, there is no L1 L2 connection between the DevNet or Ethereum, either mainnet or testnet. But yes, we are planning on adding that. If you have any architectural suggestions, you can find that issue and suggest it there. In fact, I will try to find this issue and I will paste it in the chat. Okay, here it is.
Thank you. I saw somebody raise his hand and then lower it. So if you want to ask another question, you can either write it or you can ask to speak here in the room. Okay. Oh yeah, you're here.
Thank you
Sorry.
very much.
Please go.
Fine, thank you. Thank you, Fabian, for the presentation. It was very interesting. I was wondering, when you do the invocations of methods on the smart contract, do you call do you actually call the command line command like it was on the slide, or do you go directly through some kind of Python library, or no? Or how do you do it?
That's a good question. So our architectural principle is that we rely on Docker. So this plugin, if this question is about the plugin, yes, I think it is. So basically, the plugin runs a Docker container which has the command line tools installed. Yeah. So you need to have Docker enabled. which makes it a bit more difficult for an example, Windows users to use the plugin, but still it's possible. Does this answer your question?
Okay. Yes, yes. So you are basically calling the command line at every function call from JavaScript.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah. There are
Okay, thanks.
there are specialized npm libraries exactly for interacting with the users Docker engine. So we are relying on these. Yeah. Thank you
So
for
in
that.
principle, you don't need to install StarkNet. It would be in the Docker image automatically, right?
Yes, exactly. You don't even have to install StarkNet or Lang. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your question. Thank you for your answer. There's another question. Francesco Chicon is asking, do you think it will be possible to add forking from the live network?
Well, that's a bit more complex issue, if I may notice. We haven't really discussed that is, we haven't really considered this. This is an interesting proposal, and I invite you to write an issue on our GitHub so that we can continue that discussion there.
Also, I mean, wouldn't you need a full node client in order to do that?
Probably, yeah. Yes, that is a good observation. Thank you.
Okay, so a quick aside on full nodes. So currently, all the interactions you will have with StarkNet are through services that we as Starkware are providing. But we aim to change that and to have various full node clients available that you can run as part of your infra. And these efforts are ongoing, and we are targeting end of year to have something available that you can run. So once you have this, maybe this will open the door for mainnet
Okay.
forking.
Okay. Thanks for the suggestion. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if there are other questions for Shard Labs. I see a lot of discussions regarding POAP. I want to say a few words on that a bit later, but while we have Fabian and Thiago from Shard Labs, does anyone want to contribute or ask something else? No? Well, feel free to, I mean, Fabian and Thiago are not going anywhere. They're part of our Discord and they're here quite often. So if you have more questions, don't hesitate and ask them later on, and I'm sure they'll answer. And I want to say a big thanks to you guys for, first for presenting, because it's not always easy to show what you're working on, especially in when the community call doesn't work perfectly. And mostly I want to say thank you for what you guys are building. It's tooling like that that pushes the community forward, and I can't wait to see all the great apps that will be enabled by what you are doing. So a big thanks to you guys.
Thank you.
And with that, I think we can move to Q&As. So like last time, if you guys have questions revolving around StarkNet that you want to ask and that we can answer, now is the time. So I've noted a few questions. I'm joined today by Liron. Liron, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. Hi guys, I'm Liron. I'm a product and ecosystem manager here. I'm doing a lot of work with trying to get protocols onboarded onto StarkNet, sorry, mainly right now. And getting ready for launch as well, which should be happening end of November. So I'm hoping I can answer some questions today on that you may have.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. So actually, there are 3 topics that I think, or at least 2 that I think we could cover. The first one is, and I've seen this request a few times, was can we talk a bit about data availability? Can we define a bit for the people who are not familiar with it, what is data availability? And what are the different options and trade-offs we face when building StarkNet?
Okay, so let me just take a step back. I'll explain it. I want everybody in the call to be able to understand this. So if I'm not clear, then please just raise your hand and tell me. I.e., like the audience of my answer is not a blockchain researcher who's been reading white papers for the past 5 years. It's really just somebody, a hobbyist who's just joining this call. So we generate these Stark proofs. We have the zero knowledge rollup, which does this fancy cryptography, generates this proof, which we then send to Ethereum L1. Now, the problem is, if we would just send this proof to Ethereum, Ethereum would know that the state transition that happened on StarkNet was valid, i.e. moving from state A to state B would be great. But Ethereum wouldn't know what state B is. So we would have this proof of computational integrity, but we wouldn't know what the state is. So that's where this whole category of data availability comes. There are basically 2 things we need to tell Ethereum. The first thing is we have this valid proof, which the Stark proof gives us. And the second thing is this data availability telling us we know that the new state is X. We know that LFG Moon has 100 USDC now, whatever. Okay. So there are a few, and the problem is this is expensive because if you think about it, the proof, the whole idea of generating zero knowledge proofs is that verifying them is exponentially smaller than the number of transactions that are contained within them. So we have tremendous gas savings with that first half with the proof, but we don't have gas savings with the second half with the data availability because we still need to tell Ethereum all the changes to the state that happened. So there are 2 basic approaches, well, 3, let's say, 3 basic approaches to solving this. The first one is Validium. And Validium comes and says, let's keep this data availability off chain. We won't send it to Ethereum. The advantage of this now is tremendous gas savings because all of this data availability does not need to be stored on chain. The big disadvantage of this is now that you have a somewhat centralized authority controlling this tree of the new states. And basically with every single time that we submit a proof now, we also submit an approval from this, what we call a data availability committee, saying that the root of this tree, which summarizes all of these states, is indeed valid. So that's the Validium approach. Immutable and Sorare use that right now on StarkX. And then the other extreme is to say, no, we are going to store all of the data availability on chain. And this is currently what DYDX do. And it has its costs, but you have to, there are efficiencies that you can include here, i.e. if your balance does not change from proof to proof because you're not actively trading, you're not actively interacting with the network, then we don't need to send any data for you in that proof. We can assume that you've stayed the same. So basically, all we need to do is send state differences to Ethereum. The third, and that's called. Do you want to add something there? Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to add something here also that so when you send this data to Ethereum, one cool thing that you still get is that you just need to update the state you don't need to update all the things that happened during that state. So what I wanted to point out is that basically if a user does 1,000 transactions, you only need to update really his balance, right? You don't need to make 1,000 updates. And this is aside from just executing the transaction. Even for storing the transaction, you don't have to store 1,000 things. You just store one thing, which is his updated balance. So that's already a good thing, but it's obviously not enough compared to Validium. Yeah, I just wanted to add that.
That's a good thing to add. And actually, some trivia for maybe those people who are following here. DYDX is using on-chain data availability. So that's called, the terms are terrible in the industry, but that's called a zero knowledge rollup. And then the other extreme is like Immutable and Sorare are using Validium. But what's happened, we've seen now is DYDX can actually have lower gas per transaction because of what Henri was saying. If most of the trades are done by market makers and you only need to send the difference in the state for like, let's say I'm doing 80% of the volume of DYDX. For each proof, we only need to say that my balance was 100,000 and now it's 200,000. And we're only touching like my one self, even I'm doing 80% of the for 80% of the transactions. And then the other cool thing that that we're developing that should be ready, I don't want to give, let's say January on StarkNet, is called Volition. And Volition basically comes and says that each user at the transaction level is able to decide whether they want to store the data on chain or off chain. And I want to speak about this for 1 minute. There are advantages both ways. So obviously, the main advantage is cost. If you store your data off chain with the Data Availability Committee, the costs there are basically zero, negligible. But the other thing is actually there are some users who are very ideologically aligned with decentralization, but they want to store the data off chain. And the reason is that they don't want to give away their trading secrets to other people. So if you're a very active, high-frequency trader on Diversify or like on some sort of order book exchange or perpetuals exchange, and you don't want to actually reveal your transaction history to other people because you don't want to give away your trade strategies, then you prefer to use the State Availability Committee, to use Validium. So those are the two approaches. If I summarize, Validium, the data availability is off-chain. ZK Rollup, the data availability is on-chain. And Volition, it's up to the user's volition at the transaction level to choose whether it's on-chain or off-chain. And basically, if I speak for 20 more seconds on this, what's happening is you have two trees. You have the one tree that's stored with the Data Availability Committee and one tree that's stored on-chain. And if at your volition, you can choose which tree you want your node to be on. And you can change that even. That's Data Availability Committee. Go ahead.
So this means that Volition is not something that you would have. It's not a choice from the app builder, but really from the user when he is making his transaction, right?
Correct. Now it might be that certain apps will opt for default like data availability for their apps, but it will be up to the user's decision.
It's interesting. It really curious how the user experience would turn out. Is that because I mean interacting with Web3 apps is already something that is a kind of an adventure, especially for non-custom user. So now we're just throwing one more parameter in the mix. I'm really curious to see how designers and app builders will evolve with that. But I think it's better to. I think it's better to have a choice rather than being coerced into that's the state of affair, and we'll see how apps give choices or not to their user, or how they present the default and things like that. It's going to be an interesting design space.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Laurent. I don't know if there are questions regarding data availability, but yeah, the big takeout for me is Volition, beginning of January, some kind of Volition. Okay, and now there were no further questions on the StarkNet chat. So now the second question was, what are your current updated plans for decentralization on road to universe? Since the blog post the roadmap, the road to StarkNet, a permissionless network, we've presented. I think it was over a year ago or something like. How are we progressing on that front? So maybe I can say a few things, and then you can comment later on. But basically, the road to StarkNet is will be in many steps. So we talked about decentralization mostly in that blog post. So there were 3 steps, which was planet, constellation, and universe, if I'm not mistaken. Planets being single app rollups, right? So applications with which you can interact in a zero knowledge mode, be it Volition, be it Validium or be it ZK rollup, but that would host a single app. And that's more or less what was happening with the YDX, and that is what was available on StarkNet on testnet back in August. You could build a dApp on StarkNet, but it couldn't really interact with other apps. The second step was Constellation. Constellation being a StarkNet network where you can interact with other dApps, so you would get composability. And this we reached at the beginning of September, and now you can write smart contracts that interact with each other in StarkNet. The third step was Universe. Universe being a StarkNet network where anyone can become a validator, a prover, a sequencer, so basically a decentralized network that is fully decentralized and permissionless. And you have to distinguish here a bit of there are 2 different roadmaps here. There's one that is really revolving about the capacity of the network itself. So what can you do with StarkNet smart contracts? What kind of functionality you can have? And that's more the topic of the 2 first steps, right? What you can do with your smart contract and how you can interact with the others. The third step of the roadmap revolves more around networking network issues. How do you structure your L2 so that it's censorship resistant, so that people can interact with it seamlessly? Alpha on mainnet is right now a big test, and a big the big rollout is Constellation. It's a way to try and have computation done on an L2 secured by a L1 thanks to mathematic principles. We are still working on the decentralization part. We are currently studying various designs, various consensus algorithm, wondering how do you separate the different roles in the network. So, for example, you may be aware that there is one role which is called the prover, which is the computer or the participant which is in charge of gathering function payload, transaction payloads and executing them and generating a proof. There's another role we distinguish, which is the sequencer, which is the entity that will choose the transaction that go into the proof and order them. And we're still figuring out, are these different roles? How do you structure them? How do you make sure that both are safe? And then there's leader elections and all of these topics that we're tackling right now. We aim at sharing all these documents as soon as we can, so that we can be transparent in this process and get your input, because it's very valuable. And and to that effect, I want to say that we're working on rolling out this week StarkNet Shaman, which will be our a new forum where we'll discuss all of these topics regarding the network. So architecture, engineering, and design of StarkNet, as well as provide support for the people building on our StarkNet. So that's what I would say for decentralization. For now, we're testing the mathematics engine, and we need to work more on the decentralization part, but it's the focus of our efforts right now. I don't know if you want to add something or correct something I said earlier on, maybe.
Nothing to correct. I think I would just add that like the task of decentralizing sequences is not trivial. It's very different to decentralizing miners on like L1. You know, in L1 you can just submit your transaction, have a transaction fee, and then the miners can just sort by the transactions with the highest transaction fees and then go and mine. But once you have a sequencer feeding transactions into a prover, it gets a lot more complicated because there are checks, basically like checks that you need to do before you generate a proof. Which it's not really, you don't have a situation where there's like just a race to generate the proof. You want to have it more some other consensus mechanism. So everybody else, like the whole space is struggling with this method. We have obviously in-depth discussions and progressing on that space, but I'm just saying that like I think to Henri's point, like we're just testing with releasing alpha to mainnet. The main things here are just testing the pipelines before decentralization. That's what I would add.
I think another interesting thing that we're currently tackling is I would say the cinematics of the roles of each participant in the network. In the sense that, for example, what does it mean to be a full node in StarkNet? Because, for example, like say StarkNet runs for 2 years, and then after 2 years, you want to join the network as a full node. You can take all the state diffs and you can verify all the proofs of execution and then catch up with the network pretty quickly, right? You just have to verify the proofs, update the state. It's fine. And now you're up to date with 2 years of execution. But what happens during the time resolution between the last time a batch was proved to Ethereum, your current execution time, right? How do you catch up with state? And state has not been proven yet. So one big parameter will be the frequency of proofs, for sure. But still, like, how do you, as a full node, catch up to this? Do you really, do you solve the issue that you need to have a big state and store it or execute it? It gets a bit blurry when you start to think about the different roles and capacities of these machines and how you can also use consensus to distribute roles better. But what's really interesting to me is that these are new primitives that you're not really accustomed to in the blockchain world, and so I'm really curious to see what we come out. But the really interesting thing is that these are really new tools, and you can do really cool stuff with them. So we really can't wait to share more on these topics. So that's about centralization. I'm gonna take a look if we have more questions that appeared.
You can also request to speak, and we can bring you on stage if you want to ask it verbally. While people are asking questions, I'll also just make a point that what happens next week is StarkNet Alpha, which was currently running on testnet, moves to mainnet. And you should think of it as, I don't know, the way I like to talk about it is Ethereum in 2015, before MetaMask, before Infura, when you'd like, so the infrastructure is being built in parallel. Don't expect to have like some Uniswap deep liquidity pools on November 30th where you can like ape in, I don't know, but like, you know, saying like the ecosystem will be built together with this mainnet release.
So there are other questions here. So following up on DA, somebody was saying, oh, I would definitely like to see this opened up and permissionless in some way for data availability. I can't comment on what we have as options for data availability for now because it's still very much being decided. I just want to make a comment that that we don't want to build a permissioned system. We're shooting for full decentralization on all aspects and all plan, and that's, I mean, that's what we want to build. So we most definitely agree with you. We want this to be permissionless. So that includes the availability. Actually, there is another question that popped up here regarding the Polaris prover license, and I'm curious if people have heard about it and what you think of it. I just wanted to make a quick mention on it. So Polaris aims at protecting the community using StarkNet from a copycat basically taking the prover code, deploying it somewhere else, and stealing everything that the community has built so far. We've all seen copycat projects in the last few, I was gonna say years. It feels like years, but it's probably months. But in the last few let's say last few years, we've seen projects come and go and fork the code and then steal a big user base and steal traction. We want to give StarkNet the best shot it has at being decentralized and at being the main point of passage for the code we wrote, basically. The objective with this license is not to extract value, it is to ensure that the value accrues to the community. And to that point, I want to say that the code will be available. It's just that you won't be able to use it anywhere else than at the actual endpoint on L1 that we'll have deployed for that. What I mean by that is that basically you'll be able to run a prover. Anyone will be able to run a prover without KYC, without being, I mean, the prover role will be decentralized, fully decentralized. It's just that you won't be able to prove something and use, say, deploy it to another chain and run it on another chain without the StarkNet community being involved and accepting this change. So it's really about protecting the IP of the value created by the community. And I want to say to that the people we want to protect from are not necessarily the one you think about. I mean, we're not scared of some other crypto project stealing this code and using it somewhere else. I mean, the people we're mindful of are more, say, the Amazons of the world, the Azure, Facebook. Like, say you have code that all of a sudden can onboard thousands, tens of thousands of users, and by being tethered to a permissionless network like Ethereum. The issue here is that we don't want people to be able to right-click something in Amazon AWS and say, yeah, deploy a prover, and that's it, and all of this value being created not accruing to the community. I don't know if that makes sense. If that's a topic that is of interest to the community, we can most definitely discuss it a bit more and ask for people inside of Starkware to talk a bit more about it.
Just want to add, there's a question here if the community wants an open source license. Ellie and Uri are not on the call, and they can probably speak best to this license because they're the ones who joined it. Like I joined Starkware afterwards. I think that one of the other big rationales here is you can always go easily from Polaris to open source, but you can't go the other way around. And they were just extremely concerned about developing the StarkNet community first. This is a very important question that it was asked.
So I saw a few questions pop up, but they got answers. So thank you for precising this. And yes, I think Uri and Ellie would be the best person to talk about Polaris. I wanted to address it, but if it's something that is of interest to the community, they can speak in length about it. Okay, so and then we're gonna take one last question. and that I've seen pop up a few times already. Have you any plans for community expanded activities for those who are not IT specialists? I talked quickly about this earlier, saying that right now we have a lot of work for technical work and a lot of technical staff, technical tasks to accomplish. And I can't think at the top of my head of other community things that could be done. But Liron, do you have ideas of things we could ask of the non-technical community to help for the StarkNet launch?
I think the one area is translations to like languages that are not just common languages. There's always useful contributions there with documentation of videos, etc. That's what's one thing that speaks to me. You can always message in Discord if you have like design or UX skills that maybe other projects will want to use your services for that.
Wonderful.
Fanti Fan, I should have approved you to speak if you want to ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I don't have a question per se, but I just wanted to say I'm part of the Zigzag team, and we are launching our Zigzag decentralized exchange. It's an order book DEX. We're planning to launch it at the same time as StarkNet launches. We got a $100,000 grant by StarkNet. Yeah, we're working hard to launch it at the same time and publish our roadmap soon. And we're aiming to be the best DEX on StarkNet Layer 2. So that's what I wanted to share.
This is awesome. Thank you for talking. Do you think we can get like once you're live? Do you think we can get a demo in a community call? Do you want to present what you guys are working on?
That'd be amazing. Yeah, for sure.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's schedule it for next time. By the way, yeah, sorry.
Let's stay in touch for sure.
Wonderful. By the way, and I'm asking to the listeners right now, what do you think is a good frequency for these kinds of talk? Last call was 2 weeks ago. Should we do it at this frequency? Should we do it more often? Is it too much? What do you guys think? Actually, Cake is asking the same question. Weekly would be good? Okay, so I see a lot of different, bi-weekly or weekly. I see a lot of weekly and bi-weekly pop-up. So, you know what? All right, I'm just gonna write a small poll to see. I'm gonna write a poll in announcement a bit later asking what is the good frequency, and you can comment with.
And the other thing we should ask is what time zone is the best?
Yes, good question. Okay, so time zone, frequency. I'm taking notes, and yeah, that'd be great. Hey, I think we've covered most questions. We've been here for about an hour. There was a question about Ethereum and StarkNet messaging. I answered with a link. If you have more questions, feel free to ask them on StarkNet. And as a closing note, I want to say thank you for joining. It was great to have all of you here. It's great to be able to talk about the things we're building and the people we're building it with, because it's always nice to share things you care about, and it's always nice when you see people caring about them too. So once again, thank you to Shard Labs for presenting. I can't wait to have other people presenting what they're building on StarkNet. And we will be soon rolling out StarkNet Shamans, which will be our community forum where you will be able to have support. So if you have high-level question, very technical question, you'll be highly encouraged to move the discussion there, because that way we'll be able to leverage, well, let's call it data availability, in the sense that Discord is hard. It's hard to keep track of all the technical discussions on Discord. It will be much easier there. So we'll share the link for people to subscribe. All right. And I'll share the recording on soon. Okay. So, well, thank you. Let's end the call there. Do you want to say something else, Leron, or should we end it here?
We can end it here.
Sorry?
We can end it here. I've got nothing to add.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, thanks to everyone and see you soon.